Sir, providing cover for civilian evacuation will expose you to concentrated enemy fire without adequate protection. Command was right about the tactical assessment. But Sergeant Walker wasn't thinking about protection, he was thinking about 50 children who deserved someone willing to be their shield when hell broke loose. The civilian convoy was trapped in open terrain with enemy forces positioned in the hills with clear fields of fire. Walker looked at the families huddled in vehicles, mothers protecting infants, elderly clutching photographs, children too young to understand why bullets were flying. Sometimes being a soldier means becoming the wall between innocent lives and death itself. In the volatile Helmand province of Afghanistan, civilian convoy protection operations required specialized expertise in defensive tactics, crowd control, and emergency evacuation procedures that could safeguard non-combatant populations during movement through areas where insurgent activity threatened innocent lives with coordinated attacks designed to maximize civilian casualties for propaganda purposes. Staff Sergeant David Walker commanded convoy security operations with expertise developed through 4 years of infantry training, urban warfare specialization, and civilian protection protocols that qualified him for missions where American forces served as shields between hostile forces and vulnerable populations caught in areas of active conflict. Walker possessed extensive knowledge of defensive positioning, suppressive fire techniques, and evacuation coordination that enabled effective protection of civilian populations during movement through hostile territory where enemy forces specifically targeted non-combatants to create terror and undermine confidence in coalition protection capabilities. His military training included specialized courses in civilian protection operations where soldiers learned techniques for shielding non-combatants during evacuation procedures, urban combat training that prepared infantry for operations in populated areas, and medical training that enabled treatment of civilian casualties during emergency situations that required immediate response. The convoy protection mission involved coordinating movement of 200 Afghan civilians including families with children, elderly individuals, and disabled persons who required evacuation from areas where increasing insurgent activity threatened their safety and created conditions where remaining in place would likely result in civilian casualties. Walker's team consisted of 12 soldiers trained in convoy security procedures, civilian protection protocols, and emergency medical response that could provide comprehensive security during movement through terrain where enemy forces maintained significant presence and demonstrated willingness to attack civilian targets. The civilian population requiring protection included families from 3 villages where insurgent intimidation and direct threats had created conditions where evacuation represented the only viable option for survival. Many civilians had received specific death threats for cooperating with coalition forces or refusing to support insurgent activities. Enemy intelligence indicated that insurgent forces were aware of evacuation operations and had positioned fighters along likely routes to conduct attacks specifically designed to kill civilians and demonstrate that coalition forces couldn't provide adequate protection for Afghan populations who supported government and coalition objectives. Tuesday morning brought what appeared to be routine convoy operations as Walker conducted final security briefings and coordination with civilian leaders who would help manage population movement during evacuation procedures designed to minimize exposure time while ensuring complete evacuation of threatened individuals. The ambush initiation. At 0845 hours, the civilian convoy entered the Shergal Valley where intelligence assessments had indicated moderate risk for enemy activity but recent insurgent movement suggested increased threat levels that exceeded previous security evaluations for the operational area. The convoy consisted of 8 vehicles carrying civilian families, coalition security forces, and emergency supplies necessary for sustaining evacuated populations at secure locations where they could receive protection from insurgent reprisals and humanitarian assistance during resettlement procedures. Initial movement proceeded according to planned routes that had been selected through analysis of terrain features, insurgent activity patterns, and civilian safety considerations that balanced security requirements against speed of movement necessary for minimizing exposure to enemy observation and attack. Enemy forces initiated coordinated attacks at 0923 hours using prepared positions in hills overlooking the valley floor where civilian vehicles were channeled into kill zones that provided insurgent fighters with overlapping fields of fire and tactical advantages that maximized potential for civilian casualties. The attacking insurgent force demonstrated sophisticated tactical planning, including coordinated timing that prevented effective counterattack responses, positioning that enabled sustained engagement while limiting coalition ability to respond with direct fire, and target selection that prioritized civilian vehicles over military assets. Attack methods included automatic weapons fire directed at civilian vehicles from multiple elevated positions, rocket-propelled grenades targeted at vehicle engines to disable mobility and trap occupants in the kill zone, and mortar fires that created area effects designed to cause maximum panic and casualties among evacuating families. Walker immediately recognized the tactical situation as deliberately designed for maximum civilian casualties rather than military objectives, indicating that insurgent forces intended to massacre evacuating families to send messages about coalition inability to protect Afghan civilians who cooperated with government forces. Civilian response to the attack included panic that could compromise evacuation procedures, parents attempting to protect children while trapped in vehicles under direct fire, and elderly individuals who couldn't move quickly enough for standard evacuation procedures designed for healthy adult populations. The terrain provided minimal cover for civilian evacuation as the valley floor offered open areas where evacuating families would be exposed to concentrated fire from elevated positions, while vehicle positions in the kill zone provided limited protection against sustained automatic weapons fire and explosive attacks. Walker's tactical assessment revealed that civilian evacuation would require someone to provide direct cover against enemy fire during the time required for families to move from exposed vehicle positions to covered areas where they could receive protection from natural terrain features and coalition defensive positions. Walker's analysis of the tactical situation revealed that civilian evacuation under enemy fire would result in massive casualties unless someone provided direct suppressive fire and physical cover that would enable families to reach safety during the critical minutes required for movement from kill zone positions to protected areas. Standard tactical doctrine emphasized that soldiers should maintain covered positions that provided protection while engaging enemy forces, but civilian evacuation required someone to expose themselves directly to enemy fire while providing cover for evacuating families who couldn't protect themselves during movement. Coalition forces possessed adequate firepower and tactical positioning to eventually suppress enemy attacks and secure the area, but civilian casualties would occur during the time required for tactical operations to achieve fire superiority over insurgent positions that currently dominated the engagement area. The civilian population included approximately 50 children ranging from infants to teenagers who couldn't be expected to move quickly or understand tactical instructions during evacuation procedures, requiring adult protection and assistance that would slow evacuation and increase exposure time to enemy fire. Walker faced the decision that would define his military career and determine survival for 200 innocent civilians: maintain tactical positions that provided personal safety while attempting to suppress enemy fire, or expose himself directly to concentrated enemy attacks while physically shielding civilian evacuation. Military training emphasized force protection and tactical positioning that maximized soldier survival while accomplishing mission objectives, but civilian protection missions sometimes required accepting personal risk levels that exceeded normal tactical parameters when innocent lives depended on individual sacrifice. The time factor eliminated opportunities for requesting additional support or waiting for reinforcement that could provide alternative tactical solutions, as civilian casualties were occurring immediately and would continue until evacuation was completed or enemy fire was suppressed through direct action. Walker understood that providing personal cover for civilian evacuation represented essentially suicidal exposure to concentrated enemy fire, but abandoning civilian families to enemy attacks violated everything he understood about military service and protection of innocent lives during combat operations. Communication with higher command confirmed that tactical support was available but wouldn't arrive in time to prevent civilian casualties during the critical evacuation period when families needed immediate protection from enemy fire that was specifically targeted at non-combatant populations. Walker made the decision that demonstrated the ultimate meaning of military service: he would position himself directly between enemy fire and evacuating civilians, using his body as a shield to protect innocent lives regardless of personal cost or survival probability. The human barrier begins. Walker moved from covered positions into open terrain where he positioned himself directly between enemy firing positions and civilian vehicles, creating a human barrier that would absorb incoming fire intended for innocent families while providing tactical guidance for evacuation procedures. Initial positioning required Walker to identify locations where his presence would provide maximum protection for the greatest number of civilians while maintaining enough tactical effectiveness to suppress enemy fire and coordinate evacuation procedures that required precise timing and organization. Enemy forces immediately recognized Walker's positioning and concentrated fire on his location while continuing attacks on civilian positions, creating crossfire situations where Walker absorbed multiple simultaneous attacks while returning fire toward insurgent positions and hillside locations. The physical impact of enemy fire began immediately as Walker sustained wounds from rifle rounds and shrapnel while maintaining his protective position and continuing to engage enemy forces with accurate return fire that suppressed some insurgent attacks while enabling civilian movement toward protected areas. Civilian evacuation procedures commenced as families began moving from exposed vehicle positions toward covered areas under Walker's protection, with parents carrying children while elderly individuals received assistance from coalition soldiers who coordinated evacuation while maintaining defensive fire against enemy positions. Walker's tactical communication directed civilian movement while coordinating with coalition forces who provided supporting fire from covered positions, creating layered defense that maximized protection for evacuating families while maintaining pressure on enemy forces throughout the engagement area. Medical assessment during combat revealed that Walker had sustained multiple wounds including rifle rounds to his left shoulder and leg that reduced mobility but didn't eliminate his ability to maintain protective positioning and continue engaging enemy forces with effective return fire. Enemy tactics adapted to Walker's protective positioning by increasing volume of fire directed at his location while attempting to maneuver closer to civilian positions, requiring Walker to adjust his positioning continuously while maintaining protection for evacuating families and coordination with supporting coalition forces. The psychological impact of sustained enemy fire while protecting innocent lives created stress levels that challenged Walker's ability to maintain tactical effectiveness, but the sound of children crying and parents calling for help provided motivation that transcended personal survival instincts and physical limitations. Time pressure increased as Walker realized that his wounds were affecting his combat effectiveness while enemy forces maintained pressure that could overwhelm protective capabilities if evacuation procedures required extended time periods that exceeded his physical capacity to continue operations. Walker's protective mission continued despite accumulating wounds that included additional rifle impacts to his right arm and torso that created significant blood loss while reducing his weapon handling capability and physical strength necessary for maintaining protective positioning under sustained enemy fire. Medical self-assessment revealed wound severity that would normally require immediate evacuation and surgical treatment, but civilian evacuation remained incomplete and enemy fire continued targeting family groups that required Walker's continued protection despite his deteriorating physical condition and reduced combat effectiveness. Enemy fire patterns indicated that insurgent forces recognized Walker's wounded condition and were concentrating attacks to eliminate his protective capability, understanding that removing him would enable unrestricted attacks against civilian populations who depended entirely on his protection for survival. Tactical adaptation required Walker to modify his protective techniques as physical limitations reduced his mobility and weapon accuracy, forcing him to rely more heavily on positioning and tactical coordination with supporting forces while maintaining his role as human barrier between enemy fire and innocent lives. The pain management challenge involved continuing combat operations while experiencing severe pain from multiple wounds that threatened to compromise his ability to aim accurately, move effectively, and maintain tactical awareness necessary for protecting civilians and coordinating with coalition support elements. Civilian evacuation progress showed that approximately half of the threatened population had reached protected positions, but 100 civilians including 25 children remained in exposed areas where Walker's continued protection was essential for preventing casualties during the remaining evacuation time. Walker's ammunition consumption had reached critical levels as sustained engagement required continuous fire to suppress enemy attacks while coordinating protective positioning, forcing him to balance ammunition conservation with tactical requirements for maintaining suppressive fire against insurgent positions. Coalition support forces provided covering fire and tactical assistance but couldn't replace Walker's protective positioning without exposing civilians to concentrated enemy fire during transition periods when protective coverage might be interrupted or reduced. Communication with medical personnel indicated that Walker's wound severity required immediate treatment that couldn't be provided during combat operations, but evacuation of his position would eliminate civilian protection during the most critical phase of family evacuation from kill zone positions. Walker's determination to continue protective operations despite wounds that exceeded normal combat effectiveness demonstrated the practical meaning of military service when innocent lives depended on individual sacrifice that transcended personal safety and survival considerations. The critical protection phase. The final phase of civilian evacuation required Walker to maintain protective positioning while his physical condition deteriorated beyond normal combat capability, as blood loss, pain, and reduced mobility challenged his ability to provide effective cover while enemy forces intensified attacks. Enemy recognition of Walker's wounded condition led to increased pressure designed to eliminate his protective capability through concentrated fire that targeted his position with automatic weapons, grenades, and focused attacks intended to overwhelm his defensive capabilities through superior firepower. Walker's protective technique adapted to his physical limitations by optimizing positioning that provided maximum civilian protection while conserving his remaining strength and ammunition for critical moments when enemy fire threatened to break through protective coverage and reach evacuating families. Coalition coordination became increasingly important as Walker's reduced capability required additional support from teammates who provided covering fire, medical assistance when possible, and tactical backup that enabled continued civilian protection despite Walker's wounds and physical deterioration. Civilian evacuation acceleration was necessary as Walker's condition indicated that protective coverage couldn't be maintained indefinitely, requiring families to move more quickly while maintaining safety procedures that prevented panic and ensured that elderly and disabled individuals received necessary assistance. The medical reality of Walker's situation included significant blood loss that threatened consciousness, multiple wounds that affected weapon handling and movement capability, and pain levels that challenged his ability to maintain tactical focus necessary for accurate fire and effective positioning. Enemy tactical pressure reached maximum intensity as insurgent forces recognized that eliminating Walker would enable unrestricted attacks against remaining civilian populations, leading to coordinated assaults that tested the limits of his protective capability and physical endurance. Walker's mental determination transcended his physical limitations as he maintained protective positioning through willpower and commitment to civilian safety that exceeded normal human endurance under combat stress, demonstrating exceptional courage under circumstances that challenged survival instincts. Time calculations indicated that civilian evacuation could be completed if Walker maintained protective coverage for an additional 15 minutes, but medical assessment suggested that his physical condition might not sustain combat effectiveness for that duration without immediate medical intervention. Walker's ultimate protective effort required drawing upon reserves of strength and determination that exceeded normal human capability as he maintained his position between enemy fire and the final group of evacuating civilians despite wounds that had reduced him to operating on pure willpower and military discipline. Enemy forces launched their final coordinated assault designed to overwhelm Walker's protective capability and eliminate remaining civilian populations before evacuation could be completed, creating the most intense phase of combat where individual determination would determine survival for innocent families. Walker's response to maximum enemy pressure included tactical positioning that absorbed concentrated fire while returning accurate shots that disrupted insurgent attacks, demonstrating combat effectiveness that exceeded his physical condition through exceptional marksmanship and tactical knowledge applied under extreme conditions. Coalition support reached maximum effectiveness as Walker's teammates provided coordinated covering fire that supported his protective mission while medical personnel prepared for immediate treatment once civilian evacuation enabled tactical withdrawal from exposed positions. Civilian evacuation completion occurred as the final families reached protected positions under Walker's protection, achieving 100% evacuation success with zero civilian casualties despite sustained enemy attacks that had been designed specifically to maximize innocent casualties during vulnerable evacuation procedures. Walker's mission accomplishment enabled him to withdraw from exposed positioning as medical personnel provided immediate treatment for wounds that included multiple rifle impacts, significant blood loss, and combat stress that had pushed his physical and mental endurance beyond normal operational limits. Medical evacuation commenced immediately as Walker's condition required surgical treatment for wounds that had been sustained while maintaining protective positioning throughout civilian evacuation procedures, demonstrating exceptional courage and selfless service that had saved 200 innocent lives. Walker received the Medal of Honor recognizing his extraordinary heroism and selfless service that had saved 200 civilian lives through individual courage that exceeded normal expectations for military service and demonstrated the ultimate meaning of protecting innocent lives during combat operations. Medical recovery required extensive treatment for multiple gunshot wounds, surgical procedures to address internal injuries, and rehabilitation that enabled Walker to return to duty after months of treatment that validated the exceptional sacrifice he had made for civilian protection during the evacuation operation. More importantly for Walker personally, every saved civilian represented successful fulfillment of military obligations to protect innocent lives, demonstrating that individual sacrifice could prevent tragedy when soldiers accepted personal risk for the welfare of non-combatant populations caught in combat zones. The psychological impact of Walker's protective mission extended throughout military personnel serving in similar roles, demonstrating that individual courage and determination could overcome circumstances that appeared impossible while providing inspiration for exceptional service that protected innocent lives. Walker's protective techniques became standard training material for civilian protection operations, demonstrating individual capability and tactical innovation that could save lives when conventional approaches proved inadequate for protecting non-combatant populations during combat operations in populated areas. Afghan civilian leaders who had witnessed Walker's sacrifice provided testimony about American military commitment to protecting innocent lives, creating positive relationships between coalition forces and local populations who recognized genuine dedication to civilian welfare and protection during dangerous operations. Walker continued serving in infantry roles while training other soldiers in civilian protection techniques and tactical approaches that could save innocent lives when conventional procedures proved inadequate for complex situations requiring extraordinary individual effort and personal sacrifice. Walker understood that his protective mission had demonstrated the practical meaning of military service, protecting innocent lives through individual courage and determination when civilians depended on military personnel for safety and survival during combat operations that threatened non-combatant populations. Narrator. And that's Sergeant Walker's human shield story, the soldier who became a wall between bullets and innocent lives. Here at Last Signal Stories, we honor every warrior who chooses to protect rather than simply destroy. If this story of ultimate sacrifice, protecting innocence, and the true meaning of courage moved you, hit subscribe for more military stories. Drop a comment below, would you have stood in that kill zone like Walker? Until next time, stay tuned for the signal.